Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're diving into the world of B.F. Skinner
Oh, yeah.
and his ideas about this concept called programmed instruction.
Okay.
And to help us unpack all this, we're going to be looking at excerpts from his book, The Technology of Teaching.
Right.
Now, you've probably heard of Skinner before,
Yes.
maybe from like Psych 101. You know, he's one of the big names in behavioral psychology, operant conditioning, shaping behavior with like reinforcement and contingencies and all that good
Oh,
stuff.
absolutely.
So today we're going to kind of take all of that and see how he applied it to the field of education and really kind of explore his vision for
Interesting.
how we learn.
Yeah, it's what's often overlooked, I think, with Skinner. You know, he got really into the theory, but he was also really passionate about the application,
Right.
especially when it came to education. And, you know, he really had this deep belief that with the right contingencies of reinforcement, and that basically means, you know, carefully structuring the relationship between actions and consequences, and that you could teach almost anything.
So it's not just like, memorizing multiplication tables or something.
No,
Like,
exactly.
his vision was much bigger.
It was much broader than that.
Okay.
He really believed that even complex skills like, you know, critical thinking, musical ability
Wow.
could be taught if you broke it down in the right way.
Okay, hold on. How do you teach
Right.
thinking in like a step-by-step way?
Yeah.
I mean, thinking is messy, right? It's not like
Yes.
building with Legos.
That's where it gets interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Because Skinner argued that you could actually break down the process of thinking into smaller components. And so it's not just about finding like the right answer to a question. It's about presenting problems that require like analysis, deduction, you know, making connections and so forth.
So instead of giving a student like a math formula, you give them a puzzle
Yes.
where they have to figure out the formula themselves.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
And each step along the way is designed to reinforce
Right.
that correct thought process.
Interesting. So it's like training wheels for your brain, kind of.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to see the potential here, but I don't know. Doesn't this approach kind of make learning feel a bit too mechanical? Like,
Yeah.
where's the room for like
Right.
creativity and that aha moment of discovery?
This is a common concern, but Skinner didn't see it that way.
Okay.
He actually argued that, mastering the fundamentals, you're actually freeing up more mental space
Interesting.
for creativity.
Okay.
So imagine a musician who spent years practicing scales and technique.
Right?
They can then improvise and express themselves
Yeah.
musically in ways that someone who hasn't mastered those basic skills could never even dream of.
So the structure is like the scaffolding that allows you to then build something truly unique on top of it.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, and what about motivation?
Yeah.
Because, like, in this system, where does the drive to learn come from?
Well, and let's not forget about intrinsic motivation.
Right.
Skinner recognized that the feeling of accomplishment, of figuring something out,
Yeah.
is incredibly powerful.
Like that feeling when you finally solve a tricky crossword puzzle or something. You
Exactly.
get that little rush.
Yeah, and program instruction isn't about replacing that feeling. It's about designing those learning experiences to maximize those moments.
Got it. This is giving me a lot to think about.
Good.
But one question keeps popping up for me.
Yeah.
With this whole thing.
Sure.
If we can design these learning experiences that are like so effective and personalized and everything, what happens to teachers?
Right.
Are we all just going to be replaced by robots?
Skinner addressed this head on.
Okay.
He saw machines as tools
Okay.
to enhance teaching, not replace it.
Okay.
Think of them as like assistants
Mm-hmm.
that can handle the repetitive tasks, you know, like drilling vocabulary,
Right.
grading multiple choice quizzes.
So that frees up teachers then to focus on the things that machines can't do,
Exactly.
like mentoring, inspiring, leading discussions.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And this actually brings us to one of the most thought-provoking
Okay.
parts of Skinner's work.
Right?
He argued that this kind of education, even one that uses programmed instruction, could actually lead to greater freedom
For students.
for students, yes.
Now that's a head scratcher.
Yeah.
How can a structured approach like this lead to more freedom?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Skinner believed that by teaching effective learning strategies, critical thinking skills, and those self-management techniques, you're equipping students to become more self-reliant.
Okay.
They can learn anything, pursue any interest,
Wow.
without being dependent on someone else to spoon-feed them information.
So it's like giving them the keys to their own learning kingdom.
Exactly.
That is a powerful concept.
It is,
Yeah.
and it really challenges us to kind of reconsider what we mean by freedom in education.
Right.
Is it about letting students do whatever they want?
Okay.
Or is it about giving them the tools to be truly self-directed learners? capable of shaping their own destinies.
This is definitely making me rethink a lot of assumptions.
Good.
We covered a lot of ground, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
Of Skinner's ideas. There's so much more to unpack.
For sure. Yeah, it's like a shift in perspective, right? It's
Yeah.
not just about the absence of constraints. It's about learning how to work within them, even shape them to your advantage.
Like a sculptor working with stone.
Exactly.
The stone itself has limitations,
Sure.
but a skilled sculptor uses those to create something
Right.
beautiful and meaningful.
Yeah, and that actually brings us back to the role of technology.
Okay.
Because Skinner saw machines as incredibly powerful tools for creating these kinds of learning experiences.
Okay, so we talked before about how machines could handle some of those more rote tasks in teaching.
Right.
But how else did he envision them being used?
Well, one of the biggest advantages he saw was the ability to provide immediate feedback.
Okay.
In a traditional classroom, a student might have to wait days,
Yeah.
even weeks, to get feedback on their work.
Right.
And by then, they've moved on to other things.
Yeah. The moment has passed.
Right. It's not as effective.
It's like getting directions after you've already arrived.
Exactly.
Not very helpful.
But with a teaching machine, that feedback is instantaneous.
Right.
The student knows right away if they're on the right track.
Yeah.
And they can adjust their thinking accordingly.
So it makes the learning process much more efficient.
Much more efficient, yeah.
And it also takes some of that pressure off the teacher.
Yes.
Because they don't have to spend hours and hours grading papers.
Exactly.
They can use that time to actually interact with students
Right.
in more meaningful ways.
Yeah, and machines can also be really good at personalizing the learning experience.
Okay.
In a traditional classroom, everyone's expected to move at the same pace.
Right, regardless of their ability.
Regardless of their ability or learning style.
Which can be really frustrating for students
Very
who
frustrating.
are either struggling to keep up
Yes.
or bored because they're ready to move ahead.
Exactly.
Okay, so with programmed instruction, each student can go at their own pace.
At their own pace, exactly.
So everyone is appropriately challenged
Right.
and supported.
Yeah, it's about meeting students where they are.
It sounds like he was envisioning a personalized learning experience way before we had the technology to make it a reality.
Yeah, decades ahead of his time.
And even though technology has come a long way since Skinner's day, it seems like his core principles
Right.
are still relevant today.
They are, absolutely.
We see them reflected in things like online learning platforms,
Yes.
adaptive learning software, all this emphasis on personalized learning paths.
Right, it's all connected.
It's amazing how his ideas from back then are still shaping how we think about learning today.
It is.
But I got to be honest,
Yeah,
even though I'm really intrigued by the potential here,
sure.
there's still a part of me that's a little wary of relying too much
Okay.
on technology when it comes to education.
I understand that, and I think it's important to remember that technology is a tool.
Right.
And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's up to us
Right.
to make sure that it's being used responsibly and epically.
Yeah, we can't just let it become a substitute for human connection.
Absolutely not.
That's a really crucial point.
It is.
Because there are potential downsides
Yes.
to all this. Things like the digital divide,
Right.
the risk of kind of dehumanizing education,
Mhm.
and we can't forget the importance of that human element
Right.
when it comes to learning.
Yeah, and I think this is where the role of the teacher
Okay.
becomes even more important.
Yeah.
They're not just there to dispense information.
Right.
They're mentors, they're guides, facilitators.
Mm-hmm.
And most importantly, they're human beings
Right.
who can connect with students on an emotional level
Mm-hmm.
and inspire a love of learning.
So while machines can enhance teaching, they can't replace it.
They can't replace that human element.
Right.
That's so essential.
Okay, but let's be real for a second here.
Sure.
I mean, there are some valid criticisms of Skinner's approach, right?
Of course.
It's not all perfect.
No theory is without its limitations.
Okay, what are some of those?
Well, one of the main criticisms is that it can be too rigid,
Okay,
too structured.
yeah,
Critics argue that it doesn't allow enough room for creativity,
right.
flexibility, student choice.
It can feel a bit like training a dog with all the rewards and punishments
Right.
rather than educating a human being.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and it's important to acknowledge that Skinner's early work on programmed instruction was pretty behavioristic.
Okay.
It's very focused on controlling and shaping behavior through reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also important to remember that his thinking evolved over time.
Okay.
He later emphasized the importance of things like creativity
Right.
and self-expression in education.
So how did he square those two things?
Well, he believed that creativity wasn't something that could be directly taught. but rather it emerges from a strong foundation of
Right.
knowledge and skills.
Interesting.
So once students have mastered those fundamentals,
Okay.
they'd then be free to explore, experiment,
Yeah.
create in more innovative ways.
Like that saying, you have to know the rules before you can break them.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he saw programmed instruction as a way to help students learn those rules more efficiently and effectively,
Right.
freeing up more time and energy for those creative pursuits.
Okay, that makes sense.
But there's another common criticism I think we should touch on.
Right.
Some argue that programmed instruction with this emphasis on individual learning
Yeah.
doesn't really address the social aspects of education.
Right, because humans are social creatures.
We are.
And we often learn best in groups.
Absolutely.
Bouncing ideas off each other.
Collaborating, yeah.
Learning from different perspectives.
And Skinner actually acknowledged this in his later work.
Okay.
He even suggested that machines could be used to facilitate
Wow.
group discussions and collaborative activities.
So it's not an either or.
Not at all.
It's finding that balance.
It's about finding the right balance
Okay.
between individual and social learning.
It seems like he was always willing to adapt his ideas,
He was.
He wasn't afraid to challenge his own assumptions.
Yeah.
And keep evolving his thinking.
That's one of the things that makes him so fascinating.
Okay.
A true innovator,
Right.
constantly pushing the boundaries of what we thought we knew
Right.
about learning and teaching.
So while his ideas might not be a perfect fit for every situation,
Sure,
they definitely offer valuable insights
they do.
into the nature of learning.
Absolutely.
And they challenge us to think critically about our own educational practices.
Right.
And to explore those new and innovative ways.
Yes.
To help students learn and grow. Wow, it has been a fascinating journey into the world of B.F. Skinner.
It has.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the technology of teaching,
Yeah.
what are some of those key takeaways?
Well, I think one of the biggest is that programmed instruction at its core is about understanding the mechanics of learning itself.
Okay.
It's not just about, drills and memorization. It's about really understanding those principles and then applying them to teach almost anything.
Right. And we talked a lot about machines, but it seems like the real takeaway here is that Skinner's ideas force us to really think differently about how we design learning experiences,
Right.
whether we're using technology or not.
Absolutely. And I think we can't forget that his vision was ultimately about empowering students, giving them the tools, the mental models they need to become self-directed learners, capable of shaping their own educational journey.
Which brings us back to that idea of freedom through structure.
Yes.
It's almost a paradox,
but it is.
It makes sense the more you think about it.
It does, yeah.
Like learning a new language.
Right.
The grammar rules might seem restrictive at first,
Sure.
but once you master them, you have the freedom to express yourself in ways that you never could before.
Exactly. Like the difference between trying to write a song by just randomly hitting keys on a piano versus understanding chords and progressions.
Yeah, suddenly a whole world of possibilities.
Exactly. And I think that's what's most exciting about Skinner's legacy.
Okay.
He challenges us to rethink what education can be,
to
move beyond those traditional models of rote learning, and embrace a more learner-centered approach.
So it's not just about acquiring knowledge.
Right.
It's about developing the skills and the mindset.
Yes.
You need to become a lifelong learner.
Absolutely.
Someone who can adapt and be resourceful and navigate a world that's constantly changing.
And that's a vision worth striving for.
It is.
Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Skinner's work might be rooted in the past, but his ideas about learning feel incredibly relevant to the future.
They do.
He really pushes us to ask those tough questions about technology, about the purpose of education, and even the nature of freedom itself.
And those are questions we should all be grappling with as we continue to shape the future of learning.
Well, this has been a really thought-provoking deep dive into B.F. Skinner.
It has.
And the technology of teaching.
For sure.
We've really explored those core principles of programmed instruction.
Yeah.
We talked about the potential benefits and limitations and its relevance in a world that's increasingly shaped by technology.
Absolutely.
Hopefully this has given you a new lens to view your own learning experiences.
That's right.
And to think about the vast potential of a well-designed education system.
I think so.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.